Last time we did a to be continued. After the wars of oppression, the vision of oppression, by the two wild beasts, one that came up out of the land and one that came out of the sea, backed by the dragon, who is Satan, they symbolize force. They symbolize false religion. God's allies, the Lamb and his followers, and his righteous judgments, well, they're involved. And we're going to go from oppression and persecution to that of victory and judgment and back again. There are three parts to this chapter. In chapter 14, and the title is "And I Saw," and it's Revelation 14 and righteous judgment. We'll see that we can see the Lamb and his victorious saints on Mount Zion. The three parts, we see the Lamb, we see also messages of three angels, and a voice from heaven, a call to action, a call of warning, and a call of comfort. We see these messages, and the part 3 reveals the divine ingathering of the righteous and a judgment of the world. There is harvest and there is vintage. Well, it's a good time to talk about harvest. Going to Swayze last weekend to preach at Normal, I saw lots of combines, lots of wagons, lots of trucks, because it's time to harvest. I knew a fellow when I used to worship at Stilesville on the first Sunday. Old Charlie Brewer used to worship there, and he was an old retired farmer. I said, "So when is the best time to harvest?" He says, "When it's ready. When it's got to go, it's got to go." And I'm like, yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. And Charlie wasn't fancy in his words, so he just said, "When it's time to go." Okay, makes sense, and then we go on. So we read in chapter 14, I appreciate Ben's reading of a few verses, but we'll begin at the beginning. "And I looked," verse 1 says, "and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, and I heard the voice of harpers, harping with their harps." So verse 1's important because he talks of each one of the three sections of this chapter. It begins with John saying, "And I saw." Hey, part of the title is "And I Saw." That's why. And John sees Jesus, the Lamb, on Mount Zion with the 144,000. These are the redeemed that we talk about in chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. And these are on earth. They are in the midst of Jesus. They have the marks of the Lamb, the marks of the Father. They are protected spiritually. In the previous verse, in chapter 13, it talks about those who carry the mark of the beast. The beast that came up out of the water in the sea, and the sea or the land. And they have these marks. They are spiritually protected. They have the seal of God on them. We can see that in Isaiah 28. Paul quotes from Romans 9 and 33, and Peter in 1 Peter 2 and 6 talks about, and these people have protection from the dragon and the beast as long as they stay in the Lamb's presence, in his spiritual stronghold. Now, this is not heaven yet. Is Zion the heavenly Jerusalem? It might well be, but I don't know. There are mysteries in Revelation. Verse 2, it says, "And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps." Well, that's what harpers do. They play the harp. And John hears this voice similar to the voice in chapter 10 and verse 4, like the many waters, like the thunder, like the majestic music of the harp, loud and melodious, praising God, praising the Lamb. In verse 3, and they sing as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song, but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. So this is a new song. This is a different song. And this is in the throne room that we read about as in the same place in chapter 4. Chapter 5 talks about also the 144,000. But the beasts, the living creatures, the four of them, and the 24 elders, only the 144,000 can sing it. How come? Again, they are along with the living creatures and the elders. And I don't know why no one else can learn it this time. I know Homer Haley thinks that the 144,000 are still learning it. They are the redeemed. Might be those who come out of tribulation, might be. The 144,000 are learning the song of a pure and complete redemption. Well, we all haven't yet experienced that, so it's not complete yet. So we're still learning. Isn't that part of the life of a Christian? It's constant learning, constant reading the Bible, studying the Bible. Why do we talk about, on Wednesday night we go through the Old Testament? Because it's hard to remember everything. So we're doing our best to learn. We talk about different things. We were talking about maturity this morning and self-control, to be settled. Problem is, when we settle, we're old now. We've learned our lessons. It's like bouncing your granddaughter, and I'm like, okay, she likes to be bounced, and she likes to do this, and she's really happy. The problem is my arthritic elbow that I've had 2 surgeries on is saying, you shouldn't bounce this 18-pound, almost the size of 2 bags of potatoes. And I told Sheila, I said, why didn't I become a first-time grandfather at 40 instead of 58? Well, because that's the way things are. I said, I'll remember the next time I'm a first-time grandparent, I'll make sure I'm 40. Well, it doesn't work that way. Verse 4, it says, these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. So we see these things, we see the 144,000 in verses 3 through 5. They've been purchased from among the earth dwellers by the beloved of the Lord. They are the redeemed. In verse 4, they are spiritual virgins, these 144,000. There are people going around saying, well, you can't be a Christian unless you're a virgin. Well, how do you continue the church if they don't recreate? We must be out there, not just converting the world. Yes, one of the things that we do, we talk about, are we Christians? Do we worship? Yes, it's important to worship, but it's also important to convert. That's part of our duty. And a lot of the churches are saying, well, why are we receding in numbers? Because we're not converting anyone. We're not making the effort to bring people in, or at least not enough. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. The exceptions are the ones who are growing. But that's a series for another time. But these people, they did not commit spiritual adultery. Think about the idolatrous Israelites in the Old Testament who the idolatry was compared to cheating on God, to prostitute oneself with an idol or with an image. and we see the 144,000 following the Lamb wherever he goes. In other words, we go everywhere with Jesus. Anywhere with Jesus I will safely go. Well, we can get it from there. These are on Mount Zion as faithful disciples who continue to abide and walk with the Lord. And it says, they are purchased from among men, redeemed from among men. The first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And it talks about the first fruits of the harvest in the Old Testament. To acknowledge that the Lord and its increase, the law, they all belong to God. The 144,000 might also be the new Israel. And those on earth who were purchased and believe. They were purchased. They have holiness to the Lord. And these are to come, who would also be devoted to the Lord. Verse 5, and in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. They're not lying. Their mouths have no lies in them, no deceit in them. They are without blemish. The 144,000 there is no religious falsehood in them. They neither subscribe to nor are they taught anything untrue. They would not confess Caesar, the emperor worship, or deny Jesus to save their lives. There was no spiritual, there was no moral blemish. They fulfilled the divine standard for the church. They are holy. They are sanctified. Now, verse 6. And I saw this is the second part. I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. The angel's message, a voice of warning. Paul sees another angel flying in mid-heaven. It's like the sun has reached the highest point in the heavens. As at noontime, all the redeemed earth dwellers, and a message from the world of the unregenerate, those who are not redeemed. It's for that. Is it the eternal good tidings? No, it's the gospel. It's the good news. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. The angel's message, first of all, is to fear God. And not only to fear God, but to give him glory and to worship him. The hour of the judgment is come. A message to motivate men to repentance. That's part of what we do here. We are trying to motivate people to repent, to go from their sinful ways to that of cleaning themselves up. The world's all muddy. I've talked about walking in after working in a manure pile at the VA hospital, and my mother saying, you're not coming in the house like that. Making me put my clothes in and marching me into the bathtub, saying, clean yourself up. And that's what we do now, is tell people, you're dirty. Here's some soap. Here's some water. Do you know what to do with it? Verse 8, there's another angel, a second angel, and there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Babylon is fallen. Babylon represents Rome. The two wines are given to drink. The wine of Babylon's fornication. All nations drank of it. And there is the wine of the wrath of God, which he shall give her to drink. The two become one. When one looks to the lusts of the world, represented by Rome, who intoxicated the nations and it brings on the wrath of God. Sin always brings wrath. We see that in Jeremiah 51. The Babylon falls, the world's city of lust. I guess now we could say Las Vegas, but there are a lot of places that can fight for that title today. But if they don't heed the warnings of verses 6 and 7, God's wrath is to be poured out upon it. Verses 9 and 10, and the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, and in the presence of the Lamb. The third angel in verse 9 declares the consequence of worshiping the beast and his image and the statues against idolatry, particularly the emperor worship in Rome. These are a warning to keep all from false worship. Verse 10, the wrath of God will come on those who falsely worship the beast. There will be fire and brimstone and the angels in the Lord's presence. Verse 11 talks about a terrible fate. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. In other words, don't put yourself as anything but a child of God. Getting away from that makes you someone that has the mark of something else. Verse 12, and as we read in our hearing, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. The patience or the perseverance of the saints. In other words, keeping God's commands, keeping the faith of Jesus to the end of our lives, that takes patience. You know what? It's hard to be patient. It's hard to persevere. People are saying, oh, don't you feel sorry for that old person, that old Christian? I said, that old Christian doesn't have a whole lot of time left to deal with temptation. I think that's a blessing. We need to realize that as well, that that old age is something to look forward to. Okay, maybe you don't like having a sore hip or a bum elbow that makes it harder and harder to bounce a smiling, grinning sack of potatoes or two. But we can look at it as a blessing, that only for a little while will we need to be patient. Those who persevere, those who stick to the gospel, stick to the words of the Lord, in spite of the dragon's efforts, Satan's efforts to destroy our faith and the faith and be persecuted. Verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. In other words, John is told to write this. Blessed are they which die in the Lord from henceforth. The message is from heaven. Who is it? I don't know for sure who's saying that, but the voice is from heaven. In other words, it's not a voice without authority. So, verse 14, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So we see this, and again, this is the third part. And he goes, and I looked in the King James, but it also means, and I saw. A twofold vision of harvest and vintage of the earth. The third time John looks and sees one like the Son of Man, standing on the white cloud, wearing a golden crown, holding the sharp sickle. This crown is the Stephanos. This is a victory crown, and it is worn by Jesus himself. Now, there are crowns on the heads of the evil creatures, but they aren't victory crowns. Because any victory that Satan and his demons have will only last a little while. No victory of theirs is lasting. But the Lord's victory is forever. And it says, an angel cries to Jesus, comes from the temple with a message from the Father to reap the earth. A harvest, says the world is ripe for judgment. Verses 16 and 17, and he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. Jesus cast the sickle on the earth. Another angel has another sickle. Verses 18 and 19, another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. This angel comes out of the altar with power over fire. This is probably the second altar that's mentioned in chapter 8. To reap the ripe grapes of the earth. They are ripe for judgment. The angel gathers the vintage or the grapes of the earth and placed it in the winepress of the wrath of God. This is the judgment. This is the punishment of the unrighteous. You can also see referrals to this in Joel 3 and Isaiah 63, 1 through 6. In verse 20, and the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs, as the vintage is stomped out. You ever see, like I Love Lucy, where they're stomping the grapes? Well, this is kind of like that. The grapes of the earth are stomped out and put in that winepress outside the city, probably the holy city, the spiritual Jerusalem. Blood is so deep it comes up to the level of the horses' bridles. And that is representative of the completeness, the extensiveness of the judgment. It will not be a good day for the unrighteous. So what is this judgment as we conclude today? The final judgment shall be by fire. Chapter 19 will address this fire and brimstone. This is probably about the end of Rome, its leaders, and Roman paganism in general, and could also represent similar judgments of other nations after Rome. God will use his agents, his followers, to destroy the wicked in time, but final judgment must first come. And just to be mean, to be continued. What will happen? Well, next time we're going to talk about bowls of wrath in chapters 15 and 16. But one day, judgment's going to come. Where will you be? Will you be the ones in the winepress being stomped out? Or will you be the ones that share in the victory? We'll talk more about victory in a couple of weeks, if the Lord is willing. And that's our lesson. There's been an invitation song selected. The invitation applies to you in any fashion. Please come forward and make your wants known while we stand and sing.